Hello, this is the recap video for lecture 6 on tougher articles. Started with some general comments about minor writing assignment 3, so big improvement over the second one for most people. Please write everything in a paper format. There were some submissions that were just data set 1, data set 2, but that's not really a paper. That's more like an answer to an assignment question. And there's some other things here, but really at this point, I just want to show you some highlights. So there were two tables that I thought were super great for showing the phonological rule orderings. So we see table 1, correct phonological rule ordering, and it shows a few words. So it shows all three that you were given: voice assimilation, G deletion, and surface form. Just nice formatting. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I just find this really easy to read. And then for table 2, they show another rule ordering, but instead of showing every single word, it's just the word that doesn't work, which is fantastic here. So it's not giving you all all the information. It's not giving you that unnecessary information where things work out. It's just showing the bad case. For the first one, the first data set, here's one example of a table that was quite nice. This was written as an example. So it shows the changes, it shows the words, but more importantly, the things we're supposed to focus on are bolded. So you can tell quite quickly what you're supposed to be looking at in the changes. So instead of using text highlighting or colors, they did some bolding, which was nice. For transition sentences, these are some paragraphs or introduction sentences to paragraphs that transition between the two data sets. So one thing you could use is the fact that the first one was a phonological rule of voicing at the beginning of a word, and then you could use the fact that you have a rule to create a transition section to that second section, transition sentence. So the first one says Capel has two other rules, so it explains them then. So this bit at the very beginning is being used as that transition, saying there's rules before. Now we're going to talk about two more. Here's a different type of transition in the second one, where it says, well, the first one just had one phonological process, but there are some cases where there are multiple phonological processes, and those are explained after that. And then the third one is just another example of the first one. So has other phonological rules, two of which can be observed in table one, and then they're explained. So there are a lot of really good transition sentences. These are just three that I picked out, but just some examples if you're struggling to figure out a way to connect multiple data sets together. So in class, I asked people to read de Klerk and Van Den, and this was a very difficult article. Um, it was intended to be challenging because this is a feeling that you'll get in graduate courses or even upper division undergraduate courses. Sometimes you get an article, it seems like 80% of it is just like way above your level. So how do you get information out of that remaining 20%, that bit that you understand? So a lot of people gave up quite early towards the end of the introduction. And we'll talk about some reading strategies. So reading things from front to end, like you would a novel, isn't always the best way to approach an article, especially when it's difficult. So we'll talk about some ways to get around that. So I'm going to talk about how I read this article and sort of the questions and comments I have as I was going through, and then I'll talk about so some strategies afterwards. So when you're having difficulties, what do you do? And what's important is that I'm not just talking about when you're reading a paper as an undergraduate, I'm talking about how people read papers in general. So sometimes people think of skipping sections or leaving things for later as lazy, but that's not really the case. Mostly it's efficiency. You get the details later, you get the main points first, and then you start diving into those details as you need them or as you're interested or as it relates to your research. So we should always start, well, my recommendation is to start with the abstract, just because it's basically going to tell you whether or not you're understanding the article at all. So An abstract will have keywords in it, not like keywords to identify the article, but keywords that you need to understand in the article. So, for example, this one had something called gradable adjectives. So, this would be an adjective like tall, which has varying degrees of tallness. There's this term scope. To simplify it a little bit, you can think of it as stacking. So let's say you have a TP and a VP. You could say that the higher thing scopes over the lower thing. I'm really simplifying that, but that's not really a big deal to us at this point. We see something like nanosyntactic account, and this might be something you have to look up, but basically this just says that morphemes have structure that are even simpler than the morpheme itself, so even more narrow. So for example, if you take a word like I, which is a first person singular nominative pronoun, you can think of nominative as being subject in English. We could say that there's a layer in this pronoun for person, a layer for number, and then a layer for case, whether it's a subject, object, indirect object, and so on. Now, the abstract also tells you what they're going to do, which is great. So they say that they're looking at gradable adjectives, and that positive adjectives may be prefixed with un, but negative ones cannot. So they say that there's this neg feature in negative adjectives, and when there's two negatives back to back, that makes it so it doesn't work. So they're going to show that negative adjectives get two negatives back to back, and that's the reason why it doesn't work. So what I like to do is I like to focus on numbered examples first. I'll read some first and last sentences to get an idea of what's happening, but I really like to focus in on examples to see what I can take out of them, because that's normally where they're illustrating concepts. So my personal preference is to look at the illustration first and then the explanation after, but people do it both ways. So one is something I can understand. They say, okay, here's all these positive adjectives that work. Here's these negative adjectives that don't work, like unsad, unfalse, unrude. And then there's the syntactic counterpart, not sad, not rude, not false. And those ones work. So in number two, they say negative affixes are not used with adjectival stems that have a negative value. Okay, might not know what this means right now, so I'm not paying too much attention to it. The stem, which is relatively non-productive negative affix, can attach, tends to be an unmarked weak positive scalar value. 3 again, I don't know if this means much to me right now, but 4 looks important. If I relate to the abstract, I think, okay, no two negatives back to back. So this says with a star, it's ungrammatical to have a negative followed by a negative. So 4 seems like it's useful. I'll probably read the paragraph then. I continue with taking examples just out of the paper in order. So they give some other examples at 6, undishonest, undiscourteous, undisloyal. Those don't work. But then they show ones that do work, like undisclosed, undisputed. And they basically say here that these are actually slightly different. So disclosed is a verb, so the adjective un can attach, but with dishonest, dishonest is an adjective, so un can not attach. So that's sort of the difference there. Who knows how important this is, but it seems that in 9 and 10 they're showing the same thing with unuseless versus uneventful. Unuseless, well, these seem to have the same structure, don't they? But there's a difference here with less at the end being negative, full not being negative. So these examples to me, they're not really showing the main point of the paper at this point. So I'm sort of just glossing over them. Again, what I'm concerned about in my first read through is how are they getting the no two negatives back to back? How are they illustrating that? And in my second read through, I would be a little bit more careful about things and read the details. So you'll see a lot of unfamiliar stuff in papers, especially syntax, phonology, semantics papers, especially. Any theoretical subfield will have some stuff you're unfamiliar with. So it's important to focus on the things they define, things that are shown explicitly or like with or short in this case. So in 12, they introduce some terminology. So if we want to have any understanding of this paper, we have to pay attention to 12 because they're talking about gradable adjectives and non-gradable adjectives. And they're using some interesting terminology here. So neg P stands for a negative gradable adjective. So if an adjective is negative and gradable, it will start with a neg P. If it's a adjective that is positive and gradable, it will start with a QP. So for example, for QP, you would have something like this, happy. There's not going to be a neg P above it. If we have just an AP, it's non-gradable. And this right here, the bottom symbol is a root. And what this basically means is that this is where the word originates. So you could say this is the root here, happy. So we're not going to deal with the syntactic movement stuff, feature checking, all that other stuff that comes with higher level syntax. We're just trying to understand what they're saying here. So these three terms are quite important because they tell us what those mean in context of other trees. And sometimes it's confusing because if you're syntax oriented, neg p is for negative not usually. QP is a quantifier phrase normally, so words like many or most go under QP. It's different here. And lowercase ap, that is somewhat new. People invent these new phrase types all the time. It's part of the theory. So if we continue on in the paper, we get section 3.2. And in section 3.2, there's a couple things they do. They introduce a bunch of different negatives in different languages, and they introduce which type of negative occurs where. And they end up giving this hierarchy where they say T can stack on top of focus, which can stack on top of class, which can stack on top of positive gradable adjectives. So the detail here is really just how many of those are there. So does it start with T? If it starts with T, for example, in English, we would get a not at the T level. If it started with focus, we'd get not at the focus level. If we just had class, we'd start with non at the class level. And if we just had Q, we'd have un at that Q level. And this isn't necessarily the clearest of all sections, especially with all these new markers. And if you're reading this for the very first time, it's a bit of a, oh wow, what does scope and stackability mean? So at first, I just skipped through this section. I barely skimmed through it. I just looked at the diagrams and tables to see what I could get out of it. This seemed not too important at first. If we're going to look at illustrations of trees, yeah, it seems important. And I went back to it later to try to understand it. But on my first read through, I mostly skipped 3.2 because I didn't think it was too important to understanding the main point at the time. So in 17 and 18, they put this in a bracketed notation for tree structures. And this is a tree structure, 17 ABC, 18 AB, but it's written a little bit differently. So with this one, if we just take a look at 17A, this is really just a way to draw out this tree. So this is quite large to do for all of these, so there wasn't really a necessity to do so. So that's class, that's QP, then say Q there. So this tree really corresponds to what that is saying. And basically what's happening here is that if you see something like this just means not. And as we focus in on the tree, so let's say we're just taking a look at neg P and Q. So let's say we have something like this, neg P with a neg, QP with a Q. So this would be 17C. If we had this one, this would just mean un. So this is what they're trying to illustrate here. Now, I'm not at first read, it's a lot to think about these trees, so really I'm just looking at you know, whatever there is, what do we get? So if there's neg t, folk, class, and q, we get not. If there's neg, class, and q, we get non. If there's neg q, we get un. And that actually relates back to section 3.2. So when I saw this, I did skim back to 3.2 to take a little bit of a closer look at it. They talk about not afterwards in 18a and b, but again, I think I've grasped the point from 17. So what I like about these is that they do have English here, so we can try to understand it in terms of English. Even if we don't understand what this bit is saying, we can still recognize some key features here and say, okay, neg and q is un, or yeah, neg t, focus, class, and q is not. Things like that. Now, I still find these bracketed notations quite challenging to understand at times, so sometimes I'll draw them out as trees just to help me, because I do like the visuals more, but in a lot of syntax papers, it's just the bracketed notation. So now we get here. We get to the final illustration of everything. And yeah, this is quite quite more challenging. Because if you haven't taken much syntax, you'll look at this and be like, what is happening here? And this isn't even syntax. This is just nanosyntax. This is the inner structure of a word. So we can look at the diagrams to try to help us. And even if we don't see much, what we do see in 21 is the ungrammaticality of unsad, and it's been highlighted that you get two negatives back to back here. So even if we don't really understand the trees that well, we can still see their main point illustrated. When you get two negs back to back, you get unsad, which is ungrammatical. So what does this really mean? And at first, again, I didn't think too much of it. I'm just trying to get the main point, but I can sort of illustrate this to you here. This right here, if we take a look at this bit right here, we have the structure of an adjective. So this is our adjective happy, and really the QP and below is where happy is. And we have this affix right here, which is un. So actually, I've sort of drawn the boundaries incorrectly here. Let me redo the boundaries at this point. I did get myself confused. So here we have the affix un. So it's a negative phrase. We get the neg p, we get the qp. That's what we saw in our tree before. And then what we end up with is happy over here. So like I said, if you have a positive gradable adjective, you really just need to take a look at that happy part. Now, in 21, if we do the same thing, we see that our negative affix un takes up the same space it did before, but because we have a negative adjective right here, we end up with a neg p adjective with a neg p prefix. So we end up with these double negs back to back, which make it not work. If we compare this to the positive one, well, the positive adjective doesn't have a negative above it, so it's just negative and then the positive gradable adjective. So in order to understand this, I did have to go back and read in more detail to see exactly where these affixes came from the trees. But if I circle some of these things, I can get a bit of a clearer picture of what's happening. And of course, that's again more of an advanced strategy when you're used to seeing these things. So this is me clearing a little bit of it up. So really, what we should get out of it on our first read is just noticing the double negatives with the fact that we get unsad and not noticing the double negatives when we get unhappy. That would be good enough. Now, the next tree they show is one for not. And when I saw this, I just it's not important to me. I saw the tree for not. John is not sad, so here we have not, and this really goes down all the way to the neg p there for the adjective. And this, yeah, it didn't seem important to me. I got the main point. You can't have two negatives back to back. That's what they're trying to show. The syntax, I don't really care how it works on my first read through. It works. Great. So sometimes when you see these really nasty trees with a lot of stuff, sure, you can spend time trying to understand them, but for the most part, you have to ask yourself, is it worth investing my time to do this? Am I needing to use this part? Do I need to explain this part? Do I need to understand this part for some other section? So I might think about this. I might remember, okay, 22 as syntax examples. And if it's brought up later in the paper, then maybe I'll go back and I'll try to understand it in more detail. But for the most part, when I first saw this, my thought was, this doesn't seem important. I understand that John is not sad is acceptable. There's an acceptable tree. Who cares what it looks like? It's fine. So that was the first read through, and I skipped a lot at first because, again, my point was just to understand the main points at first. It wasn't to understand everything in detail. And it's a good strategy to take because when you're reading an article, what are they really trying to get across? They're trying to get across new research, new ideas, a main point or two, and then they're supplementing that up with details. So if you don't understand the main point, the details don't matter. If you understand the main points, but then don't understand the details, well, that's okay because you have time to work through the details, discuss them with people, ask questions, and so on. No, there's nobody out there who can read a paper and understand everything the first time through. That just does not happen at any level. There may be some incredible academics that can do it, but the reality is that's probably not every paper. In fact, it would be impossible for it to be every paper. Papers are confusing, they're dense. So you're not being lazy by skipping sections, you're being efficient. Just make sure you don't skip too much. So here are some strategies for reading. And we covered the first two as we went through, so I'll just briefly go over those. So the abstract, of course, is incredibly important. It's where you can find terms that you're unfamiliar with and you can define them so at least you can get the main gist of the paper. So there's a glossary website here that you can click on the slides in order to take you there. There's so many linguistic terms there. Google is great for linguistics anyways, just don't forget the plus linguistics afterwards. And the Wikipedia scene for linguistics is fantastic. It's just a really good community, lots of resources, lots of references. I haven't seen anything on Wikipedia in terms of actual theoretical linguistics that I've been really concerned about before. Number two, examples. So some people really like visuals and illustrations. If you're one of those people, examples are a great way to ease yourself into a paper. And in papers, it's not always the case that the easiest examples come first. Easy examples are spread throughout. Sometimes there are none. Sometimes more difficult ones are put first in order to prove a point. So find the examples that you can understand and then build off of those. So you can read the example you understand, read the paragraph surrounding it, and then try to see how it gets to be more complex. Unfortunately, that's not something you can do in every paper because not every author does that. But when it's available, it's a great strategy to use. So if we take a look at a couple examples here, a couple excerpts. So one is from Renero about sluicing. So sluicing, to explain it quickly, what is it? So here's the example. Someone bought a lot of beans. I don't know who. So I think this is one that comes up later. So someone saw Mary, and then you can say, I don't know who. But what's interesting about this is that who really starts its own sort of little clause in there. And instead of saying who saw Mary, so someone saw Mary, I don't know who saw Mary, we can just get rid of saw Mary and say someone saw Mary, I don't know who. So that's what sluicing is. And here's an example of another language with some very complex words and notations here. So often at the ends of articles, they'll show you what these mean. So a lot of them are standardized, but sometimes they're unfamiliar anyway. And what's really nice about this article is that they actually explain this example using terminology. So someone bought a lot of beans, I don't know who. So they say the first clause in 15, this one right here is what's called the antecedent. This is what's giving meaning. So in the someone saw Mary example, this is what's considered the antecedent because it's giving meaning to whatever comes after who, whatever's being sluiced in that case. They explain the ellipsis site, or the sluice, is the stuff inside the angled back brackets. So this right here, uh, someone bought a lot of beans, is what's being deleted or what's not being spoken here. It's also called the target clause, and they say the remnant is who. So really, who bought a lot of beans? That's what's being expressed in those pink brackets there. So it's not easy to understand at first, especially with a lot of complex just notations here. When you're looking at another language, it's always hard. But I am relying quite a bit on the English translation, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes the English translation is the best way to really understand something if you don't, well, I shouldn't say really understand, but to get some intuition about what you're looking at, especially if you're not familiar or not comfortable analyzing other languages yet. You will get to that point, but it takes some time. So examples here can help you learn exactly what's happening. So for instance, from this example, I know that the sluicing happens at the end of a sentence, and it happens after this who word in kachiko. And they also gave me some terminology, which is really great. So if I want to, I can actually connect a lot of these ideas with colors just to further help my understanding. And then we have, say, this remnant, which is right there, who. Okay, here is a paper by Hiroiwa and Kobayashi for countersluicing. So countersluicing is a little bit different. So they have some conversations with clefting and countersluicing. So they can say, it was ant chair that Arne Jacobson designed. And then you could ask a question and say, what chair was it that Hans J. Wagner designed? Okay. Now, you don't have to say that necessarily because you're already in this clefting structure. It was blank that someone designed. So in Japanese, you can countersluice. And then instead of saying, what chair was it that Hans J. Wagner designed, instead you can just get rid of the what chair was it part and say Hans J. Wagner designed what? And then someone can respond and say it was the chair. So they call it countersluicing because you're really just getting rid of part of the subject here. Well, what chair was it? It's really the first clause. And then you're using the relative clause that Hans J. Wagner designed as a standalone here. So these examples can help illustrate things. There wasn't really a good English translation, so they put the word literally because we didn't really have that in our language. So they show an example with literal translation in hopes that we understand. But these examples can help us, understand the paper a little bit better. And these are the things that I gravitate to just because I like to see things illustrated. Now, examples are one thing, but there's also diagrams, figures, and tables. And sometimes those are really great, sometimes those are really bad. Diagrams can be very complicated, especially in result sections, and sometimes they're not worth spending that much time on because the text is easier to understand. So you can look at diagrams, but if it's really confusing, rely on the text. If it's something that you can understand by looking at it quite simply, for instance, if you're comfortable with syntax trees and you were able to uh, understand what was being said in those trees earlier, then sure, start with those. If you don't get it, rely on the text. Now, the most important thing in terms of the writing is to focus on those first and last sentences because we have intro and conclusive sentences, and even in paragraphs, they're not really introduction and conclusion sentences, but the first sentence does introduce the topic, and the last sentence usually does close the topic or creates a transition into something else. So if we read the first and last sentences, we can get a pretty good idea of what the paper's trying to say without understanding all the details. Sort of like reading an abstract, but it's a lot more detailed. So, for example, let me just get rid of a bunch of stuff here. So let's pretend we cannot read anything that's not the first or last sentence of a section. And let's just see how far we go. So I'm going to get rid of the examples too, and we'll see how much that we can actually learn from it. So I have to get rid of this bit here. So it says no relational noun can be stranded in Kachikkel. I repeat the data below with the schematic of the structures throughout the derivation that this alternative would assume. So they're talking about noun stranding. They're talking about an alternative derivation. So something they're not putting forward, but something else to see how it works. So that's from the first and last sentence. There it says an analysis that took examples like 22b, repeated as 27, to involve matching passive voices requires p stranding followed by repair. The next sentence says something. We therefore set aside this alternative and maintain that voice mismatches are real. So even without looking at the details, we know they're talking about relational noun stranding. We know they're introducing an alternative, and their final sentence is that they're not going to maintain that alternative, they're going to cast it aside. So, if we bring the details back, we can read a little bit more, but we've already learned that this is not what they're going to use. So, do we have to spend time on it? Well, depending on how much information you want, how much you want to understand the paper and get into the details, you might want to read it. If you're just trying to get the main points, well, there's not really much point in spending a lot of time working on it. Again, it depends on your values. It depends on what you're trying to do with the paper. So back to Hiryu and Kobayashi. This is a nice introduction to sluicing. Once again, I'm going to try to get rid of everything that is not the first or last sentence, just to see what we can take out of it, how much information we're actually getting, and whether or not we can really find the main point here. So let's get rid of all this, and let's see what we can learn. So as is well known, Ross proposed that a truncated WH question, such as 1, has a full-fledged structure of WH question and is derived from WH movement and deletion. So maybe I would keep example 1 in just because it references it. So let's actually just check what example 1 is quick. Somebody just left, guess who? And then just left is crossed out. Okay. In this short article, I will provide evidence for a WH-cleft analysis of sluicing and against the in situ deletion analysis. What they're trying to say here is that it's not just deletion where it stands, there's some movement going on. So section 2 says 3 approaches. The first sentence is, Inoue observed that a similar truncated WH question also exists in Japanese. So they show another type of question. This analysis assumes that a WH phrase moves to the specifier in Japanese just as it does in English. So from this, what I'm getting without any details is that they're going to show that there's movement to explain 1, and in 2, they find another type of phrase that works similarly and they shows that there is movement. So they're already looking at supporting evidence. Now, if we delete all this, we can read a little bit more, get some more details, see the example in 2 a little bit more clearly, but we could still get the main idea of what they're doing just by reading that first and last sentence. So again, how much detail do you want? What's the purpose of the paper? What are you reading it for? Are you reading it because you need the specific details? Are you reading it because you want to expand your knowledge of what's actually happening in the field? And maybe not so much the why, but more so the what. So in class, we talked about strategies that are personally effective. Some people said that they read the conclusion first. Some people said that they reference other articles. Some people said that there was a mix between the intro and conclusion or reading the first and last sentences. And really any strategy will work as long as you're comfortable with it and as long as it's not bogging you down mentally. What's important when you're reading papers is to read it in such a way that you can still focus and get information out of it. So if you're reading it from front to end, trying to understand every single sentence, you should stop doing that because it's not a good use of your time and it's going to require a lot of mental effort. If you're understanding everything easily, sure, go for it. But if you're having difficulties understanding what is being said or understanding examples, it's okay to skip those and come back to them later. Because sometimes those are explained later in the paper or they're referenced later in the paper and it will make more sense after. So, a lot of different strategies you could use. There's not really a wrong one, but be very careful of your time and your mental effort being put into these things because we do eventually burn out. We can only read a paper for so long. We can only remember things for so long. We can only focus for so long. So try to get the most out of a paper with your time. The next two, this is important. Do you believe that any linguist could read the previous paragraphs and understand everything being said? So do you believe that every linguist can read number 2 and understand exactly what's being said in number 2? The answer is no. Not everyone can. If you're doing syntax for a living, sure. If you're doing morphology for a living, sure. If you're doing phonology for a living or pragmatics, there's no expectation that you can understand that immediately. You might need to look things up or ask questions or spend more time on it. Linguists are specialized, a lot of them. So when they read stuff in their paper that in their field that they're familiar with, it's fine. When they read stuff outside of their field, it's quite difficult. Sometimes even papers in their own field are very difficult because it's not a particular aspect that they're looking at. So yes, there are some linguists out there who have been working for 20 to 30 years that would struggle with a paper almost as much as you would if it's totally off in a different field. The only difference is they have practice and experience failing, and they accept that. They're used to it. The third one, do you believe that linguists write to general linguistic audiences or specialized linguistic audiences? It's almost always specialized. If you want to read something that is a little bit more general, you should read some theses, some master's theses. Um, they're definitely longer. They're not written to a completely general linguistic audience, but they are more general than papers. The last one, if you're thinking about syntax papers, we saw some cases today where we have things like these. So there's no trees. It's just a bunch of bracketed notations. And this is pretty normal in the field. So for syntax, you don't see too many trees. It's just a lot of bracketed notations. It's sort of unfortunate because visualization can help a lot, but it's something that we have to get used to if this is what we pursue. So that's it for this. The next writing assignment due this Thursday is to summarize an article excerpt. So you can choose from one of these three. Pay attention to these section-specific points. And yeah, that's it. So if you have any questions, you know how to contact me.